I'll click this button and we are all set.
Okay. Good evening. This is Dave Messina. Above me is Dan Oakes. We'll see whatever framing you guys have, and also Alex and Blunty. So, great news from our view is that Blunty is joining the core team of FPVFC, and uh, I'm delighted. And I'll just give you a little bit of background. Blunty has spent over 6 years in the professional cannabis in Colorado, assisting the state marijuana enforcement officers to dial in the interpretation of new cannabis laws to fit the real world. So he's got an excellent understanding of regs and working with government agencies and the speed with which they work. Um, we also he's worked with other departments like excise, license, fire, Department of Agriculture, and the Marijuana Enforcement Division. He's currently working doing the weekly news show, as then I hope a bunch of you know, and the monthly new product roundup with Joshua Bardwell. And Blunty is also providing free troubleshooting services for drone repair and also one-on-one billable paid troubleshooting. So, Blunty, welcome to this team, and we're delighted to have you. And hopefully, a couple words.
Yeah, I'm
That
happy to
was
be
2
here, man.
words. You're done. Sorry.
Yeah, it's exciting to be on this side of stuff. I'm hoping that yeah, I mean, I can help make a difference in the hobby is the main. I think that's kind of why we're all here and what the point of this thing is, right? So, I just hope I can help in any way doing that. And I don't know, it can be nerve-wracking, I think, for a lot of people to see upcoming regulations and laws and where everything lands and what's happening. And I just hope we can help guide that in the right direction and make sure everything goes like we want it to, so we can carve out places for us to fly.
Right? How we want to continue, how we fly and where we fly. And yeah, so
Yeah,
thank you. And I'm confident in talking to you and getting to know you that you'll make a difference here, and you'll make a difference with our work with the FAA and the various other organizations like Drone Safety Team and maybe ASTM, but that one is that's a time sink. So welcome, and we're thrilled. And now we are five. Josh is not here tonight
Yeah,
because he's on a personal note. So he's just fixing air conditioning in Arizona. So
yeah.
that's a
I
priority.
was just going to really quickly say, no, we didn't replace Josh with with ItsBlunty, even though it kind of looks like that's what we've done over here in the live stream. But yeah, you don't want to spend too long in Arizona with no air conditioning. So that would definitely be my priority as well.
definitely.
So we had just a couple of things to go over this evening. One was today it was released that we heard. I've still not seen anything official. If anyone
Supposed
has,
to be in the register tomorrow.
Yeah, the most
okay.
official thing I have is from Facebook,
Yeah.
from the FAA Drone Zone. I don't know if they
Yeah,
posted it
from
anywhere else, but I can grab
yeah,
the
that was.
Drone Zone link here.
Oh, good. I'm glad they have a link there.
Oh, yeah.
So the news that we got is the September 16, 2022 deadline for manufacturers for remote ID has been pushed to December 22nd, 2022. And they apparently were explicit that there's the link, that the second major deadline of September 16, 2023 is not moved. And so this only affects the first deadline, which was just a week or so out from now.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting.
one thing,
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Alex.
I was going to say one thing to add to that is the post where we saw the 22nd of December and the FAA post says the 16th of December, so they're two different dates. Not, I'm assuming the FAA one is the correct one, but the 22nd was also heard from a reputable source. So we'll see what the register shows tomorrow.
Sure, but then
Good
also
point.
based on
Okay.
what they've posted, it says it's the FAA's they're using their discretion for whether or not to enforce it. So, I mean, like if they just decide not to enforce it till the 20th, it's not super official either way.
And then that also seems as if like, oh, a company's trying to implement it but doesn't have it implemented yet. That they, at least the wording how I saw it, seems like that's how they're thinking. If a company's trying to implement it but doesn't have a solution yet, versus a
Yeah.
company that's just plain out ignoring it until then.
It says for drone manufacturers who are making progress towards remote ID compliance. So I assume what they're trying to get at there is if you tell us that you're working on it and try to give us some proof that you're working on remote ID, we're not going to enforce these. But if you're just outright ignoring everything and somebody brings it up, I suppose they'll enforce it. But it seems
Is
pretty
this the kind of thing
unlikely.
that will probably be like an advisory circular? Is that how they do this stuff typically? Or
If they have a varied enforcement, I would imagine that they are working on an advisory circular because
It says,
that's an oddball
yeah, it just
type of
says
enforcement.
full details will be posted in the Federal Register September 8th. But
Yeah.
they're
Hey,
saying they're
Alex,
just going to use their
could you
discretion.
Alex, could you search to see if Skydio has a declaration of compliance on the FAA site?
Sure thing. Just
So
I have that
this
tab
is
open on my phone 24/7.
this. Sorry. Uh, um,
I think I
this
had
is
that one
a
up
good.
here somewhere.
This is a good
Nope,
seg.
nothing yet.
Okay, so very interesting. So no, that's telling. So great. Uh, we work with and we know the government affairs people at Skydio. That organization's led by Jen Player. She's been in the industry for a long time, full-scale pilot, drone pilot, great person. She works with us on multiple DAC work as well as the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC. She led one of the subgroups. So great person, great team. The Skydio announcement is worth reading. It's a couple pages and it articulates a lot of things we know. So, if you're going to the Skydio announcement thinking, oh, I'm going to learn something, well, pass. So it's just well written, and they say we're going to take care of you. We're going to have remote ID. There's the announcement,
I assume
and
that's the one
so
you're
if
talking about.
that's it. And if one of your friends says, well, what is remote ID? In addition to the work that we've done, this is a good brief explanation. They've got an FAQ and lays it out pretty nicely. They don't go into any details of the Skydio remote ID solution other than to say that it's integrated and it's obviously standard remote ID UAS. With that, when Blunty and Joshua Bardwell had me on their show for an interview, one of the topics, and Dan, if you could find the link to the Andrew Trigel
Yeah,
video,
his interview when he
that's
was
what I
on with Drone and Sundry.
yes.
Pretty sure this.
So
Yep, this is
one
the
of the
one.
things that the three of us, Joshua, Blunty, and I talked about was, well, what do you think about the possibility of a open source solution for remote ID? And I said, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen. And so listening to this video, there's some hint that maybe it will. And so we're looking into this and we're talking to some of these folks. Turns out, goes by Andrew Trigel, goes by Tridge, is also a retired IBMer. He's a PhD, worked in IBM research, art guy. And the video is the video is long. You may want to crank up the playback speed, but if you're into software development as well as remote ID, this is an interesting topic, and I mention it because this could be, if they figure out how to enable remote ID in an open source platform of
In this
what's
case,
running on the flight.
it's ArduPilot.
Ardu
Andrew,
Pilot.
he's a developer for ArduPilot.
Yep. Yeah. He's the lead on systems development for ArduPilot. Sounds like he's been there for a number of years now. And as they say, ArduPilot runs on satellites to submarines and everything in between. So it's a pretty capable piece of code, and it, worth tracking. And other than that,
Did you have anything to say about Betaflight possibly getting some support for remote ID, or anybody working on that?
I know that Betaflight is thinking about this. Don't know what the outcome of that will be at this point. I know there's interest, so hopefully over the next couple of days we'll have something more substantive there.
And I know Dominic Clifton has reached out to us, and he is one of the top committer, or what do you say, top people who submit code to Betaflight and
Contributor. Yep.
contributors to
An open
Betaflight.
source contributor.
And he's definitely seriously looking into what Betaflight can do to support people who want to be compliant with remote ID.
All right. And so all of our flight controller software forks operate under GPL version 3, so the open source license of GPL version 3.0. And in that, there's a stipulation that the cryptography keys need to be handed to users. And so something that would be tamper resistant, that would obviously fly in the face of tamper resistance. So we think that Tridge has probably got some good ideas on how to work around that. Certainly, Dominic is thinking about it, and they're not sure that they want us to share some of the details, but we'll find out over the next week or a couple weeks.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in how that stuff works, but Andrew Tridgell definitely was doing some brainstorming and mentioning some of his ideas in that video, if you watch it on Drone and Sundry. So if you do have questions on how is it possible, that might help answer your questions. Otherwise, if other people here have other questions about how can this be possible, let us know, and we'll try to answer them. But it really will remain to be seen, like, once they come up with what they think is a good solution and submit it to the FAA, will the FAA approve it? Will they say, no, that's not good enough? Or will they say, oh, it's really close, but you have to do these little things to make it slightly better? Kind of like what the FAA did with the remote ID means of compliance from the ASTM standard. And from what we understand, or at least what I heard, that with ArduPilot, they've paid for the ASTM standard, and that's kind of what they're using to work from to try to meet the remote ID goals.
Do we know any more about like what they really mean by tamper resistance or evidence? Because I even looked through the guidelines and it's not very specific.
Very vague, and we've had this is the subject of we've restarted the ASTM working group meetings, so 138 people are on invitation, and we've had 4 FAA folks sit in, and the topic is the tamper resistance and what should the ASTM do. It's likely that we'll modify the standard at some point, but we're not. The consensus is that we're not in a rush to do that. And part of the challenge is that the guidance that the FAA gave, which were the 3 conditions on top of the approval of the MOC, were very, very general. And so it said tamper resistance in the rule. We tried to provide latitude for the manufacturers, and then the FAA came back and said no, they want it to be to follow the conditions that they set, which were indeed also vague. So there are firm definitions about tamper-proof, tamper-resistant, but they've been clear that they are not looking for a reserved or careful language. They want it to be somewhat vague, and that's troubling because and we went through this with the FAA on the phone. What this means is that a manufacturer could launch a broadcast module. A safety event happens that's an incident, it's not a positive, and then the FAA will come back and say, no, we're going to rescind your declaration of compliance approval. You have to resolve this. And so what that means, obviously, is that we're doing an iterative design post-production, which is the most costly thing to do, and that can threaten the life of a company. So
Is
go ahead.
is this like a cover your ass thing for them? Like where they don't want to specifically define so that if there is a safety event based on their definitions, then they're not in trouble? Is that the idea here? Because otherwise it seems insane not to just say, here's the list of things we need from you. Just do this. And then everybody's cool, right? Because like there's so many levels of tamper resistance. I know this from cannabis. We dealt with this with all the packaging. They had to specifically define exactly what tamper resistance was, and then they specifically approved individual packaging for years because they could not decide exactly how to write in the law. And it was all interpretation. It was like, oh, you need to push and then pull down, and it needs to be 2 grams of force. And then for a while they were putting kids in rooms and seeing how many kids could open the bags, and that was the level of tamper resistance. Was like how many of the kids in these studies could open the bags over a certain amount of time. It was very loose, but they eventually dialed in, and I'm afraid the same thing's going to happen here, where we were spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on packaging that we were throwing away like a month later because they decided like, oh, this doesn't work, and if we find this, you're in trouble, so you can't use this, but you still have to have something to leave your business with. And so it just scares me from that direction, because like we could say tamper resistance is you can't open this case to get in the hardware, but then it's just a sticker. Or we could say tamper resistance is like we're potting around the chip, so you can't put probes on there to change the pin value. There's so many different levels of like tamper resistance.
Something
right?
I've learned from working with the FAA so far is they really love to have other people solve their problems for them. And so they'll sort of propose something, hope somebody solves that problem for them, and then maybe in the future they'll say, yeah, what those people did, that's what we want you to do too.
Right. Yeah, so I don't think it's malicious, but it sure is capricious. I mean, this is damaging, and I made it very clear on to the FAA on the ASTM call, and I was backed up by a number of other individuals that this pushes the cost up astronomically. And I said, and I then asked for it. I said, how about we'll iterate on some ideas with various manufacturers now prior to manufacturing a broadcast module, and you just focus on that, just the tamper resistance. And they were like, no, it's not the way we work. They want to see it out in the field, and if they want to give themselves an out to rescind the approval. So
TextJet was asking, does the tamper resistance apply to the hardware as well? And Dave, you can help fill in some details here, but didn't the ASTM standard, when it got approved by the FAA, some of those additions were very hardware related to hardware tamper resistance?
Yes, the initial ASTM mock was software specific. The FAA tamper resistance was implied hardware, but again, it did not use, and they shied away from industry specific definitions so that we could nail this down. So it's still vague. It does now encompass hardware and software.
Yeah, like 358622 just says like it says broadcast modules. The remote identification broadcast module must be designed and produced in a way that reduces the ability of a person to tamper with the remote identification functionality. That is such like that's so loose. It's the loosest thing you could possibly say, right?
Right. Well, 3586 is that's the ASTM language. And then there is a memo from the FAA that approves the means of compliance, and there are three sentences that were appended, which don't help. And they don't nail it down. It's more, so we have the we are trying to work this by working on each of the sentences one at a time. And one of the proposals is could we say that it's the in the manual, while the manufacturer can have the ability to alter or change, because change the code inside the remote ID assembly, because right now in the rule it's stipulated that the manufacturer must inject errors, and the only way to inject those errors is to alter the code. So they, within their own rule, they're contradicting themselves, and we've pointed that out to the FAA. And so this is working along slowly.
Gotcha.
So KBS Ken's asking, I can see how the add-on module will work for an individual who builds their own quad. You don't need to certify the module works the manufacturer would. How would you envision the firmware like Betaflight making certification easy for the individual that builds their own or small manufacturer?
But I would guess, I would assume the idea here is that the Betaflight is just interfacing with hardware you already have, is like the idea. So you're buying a piece, and that piece or idea is the tamper evident part, and then you're just applying it to the build that you have, right? So like you can use existing hardware based on like, as long as the tamper between pieces of hardware is like not compromised or whatever, right? Is that sort of the idea? Because we're saying that you have to develop declaration of compliance, right, for the remote ID broadcast module. But what part is the actual module in this open source version, I guess, is the idea, right?
Right. And so the firmware on any broadcast module is likely to be proprietary code, not open source. And so if there is a good secure entry and exit into the flight controller, which is running Betaflight, ArduFlight, iNav, whatever, all open source, the idea there is that Betaflight might be working with a remote ID manufacturer to make their system, it's an API, an application programming interface, function more efficiently. But that would likely be the level or the extent of Betaflight's effort.
So
hopefully that answered the question.
Not thinking of like modules we would put on our home built drones, but thinking of things from the Ardu pilot point of view. What Andrew Tidgell was talking about in his video, he talks about how he wants to make their software work in such a way that somebody manufacturing a drone, say you're a new company, you're going to build a drone for doing Amazon deliveries or something, and you use Ardu Pilot. So they have code in there that you can build a remote ID compliant system out of, but you will still have to go through the compliance with the FAA to get it all approved and everything. But they will have software in there that knows how to grab the GPS information, knows how to send out the ASTM standard remote ID signal, and then it's up to that person building those drones to make it in such a way that it is tamper resistant.
So also in this case, aren't we just assuming that it's okay that the GPS signal isn't tampered with that's coming in, right? Like, I mean, I feel like there are so many pieces you can still tamper with, right? There's data coming from your other equipment going through wires or something. It just seems so easy, even in any of these situations, to tamper, right? Like, so I just wonder, like, how are you sure that like that's a good signal? Like I could spoof the GPS signal and just
that
give
reminds
you a
me of the article I just read a couple days ago about cargo ships out in the ocean. They have GPS trackers, and you can see where they are, and they all the time are lying about where they're at with false GPS information. So they go pick up oil in Brazil or something where they're not supposed to be, and they say they're 300 miles away, and like that's just how they do business.
I mean, can't I just like modify it so that, like, yeah, I mean, the luck is that it's right now local, but if this was any kind of UTM, I feel like it would be a bigger deal. But like, how are they going to get GPS data from us when this is on a UTM? Like, I don't know. There are just so many questions that aren't answerable right now, right? Like, I feel like that's part of the problem.
I agree. Yeah. If this were an unmanned traffic management system, I think would all be really fretting. Would want all of this encrypted and this secure.
Yeah.
And
So I mean,
someone would be insisting about a network RID as well.
like when
And
you
go ahead.
Sorry, sorry. You can shut me up whenever you need to. Oh, so basically, my one of the other questions here is like, can't I just like spoof my location to be anywhere? So like your app shows me wherever the GPS location is because it's reporting. So then I'm like 10 miles away. You have no idea where I am, and there's nothing you could do about it. Like there's just so many. It just seems weird. I don't know. Like to me, if you're going to tamper evidence something, the GPS is going to be included. It's got to be in that package. It's all potted together, and you're getting real data. You're not getting fake data from an extra source, right? And I was reading through a little bit, and I saw in 358622, I think, where they were talking about how like they kind of have to use external sources, but they were talking about it from the point of view of phones, and it wasn't clear. Like they were talking about, hey, phones are only this accurate, so we kind of have to do this. But like that seemed to be for the ground control station. Like,
Exactly. For the ground
yeah,
control station, which has the necessity or the requirement rather of a 15-foot vertical accuracy.
right. But then, like, yeah, on the drone, it seems like I just don't understand how they're going to do that and guarantee anything. Like, also, I noticed that there was like an exception that you don't actually have to have a lock because I know they mentioned indoor in 358622 as well, and like,
That's getting a lot of attention because
yeah,
there are federal agencies as well as public safety which have a very reasonable. They don't have to, but they want to comply with remote ID when they're operating just normal transit. When they're
right.
under some type of covert operation, either it's in theater or doing something that they don't want to transmit their location, they want the ability to turn off. And so the way the FAA has no problem with that, and their response is fine. Well, that means that the manufacturer of the drone will just have to sell the public safety company a unit that turns on and off, and that will not be compliant because the remote ID cannot be turned off. So I
Yeah,
So,
get
that's something
my
we
head
we
start.
we want to ask the FAA to create an advisory circular that covers how are people expected to do that, because people fly drones indoors all the time. Like if you buy a DJI drone and you want to fly it inside, you should be able to do that because that's not in FAA's jurisdiction. But according to the remote ID rules, DJI wouldn't be able to produce that drone for the United States.
yeah, I noticed. I linked a picture here, but from the rule. But I noticed that it says Note 6, as stated in Note 3, the pre-flight systems check does not require establishing a location fix or specific accuracy to pass. Under certain conditions, indoor or GNS Canyon, this may not be possible. So I'm
Is that
kind of
right?
that's from 358622. So I don't know what that means. Like, does that mean like it says pre-flight systems? Does that mean don't you have to pass pre-flight systems to take off, and that would mean you could take off, or like
That's
it's not
only for
clear to me.
standard remote ID. You don't. You need. It has to check that it's broadcasting. If it's broadcast module, then it only has to have an indicator whether it's working or not, but it doesn't limit takeoff or landing.
But it seems to put the note under standard remote ID rule, which is like why I'm confused, I guess.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
it is for that is for standard. Standard does need. So
Right.
it's basically
But it
saying that
says
you
you
won't be
don't
able to
need it.
fly there.
But it says you don't need it. It says pre-flight system check does not require establishing a location fix or specific accuracy to pass, because under certain situations this may not be possible. I just noticed that. Sorry, I'm not trying to derail, but
No,
I just
no,
noticed
Good,
that.
really good question.
Okay.
yeah, yeah. That should apply. Okay, what was Note 3 say exactly? Yeah, good question.
Yeah, Note
And also,
3 says
up
Note 3
above
says
the,
although the
go ahead.
it just says although the aircraft and GCS ground control station must be designed to meet certain accuracy requirements, the pre-flight systems check of the specific hardware software functions does not require establishing a location fix or specific accuracy. So I don't understand what that means. Like, how could you do both? Like, you have to have a
Because
location
the
fix to get it, right?
because the efficacy test is in flight, and so it's not the testing for the accuracy is done with the UAS in the air, not prior to
So
taking off.
a standard remote ID drone is supposed to land as soon as possible if there's any issues with the remote ID system. So you're flying
Yes.
around and you lose GPS accuracy, you're supposed to land immediately,
But you don't
right?
know about accuracy. You're just all you have to monitor is the system functioning, and
Is it
so are you
broadcasting?
broadcast? Is it
Well,
broadcasting? Are you receiving?
if that's true, this sounds like you can pass your pre-flight test without having any GPS accuracy at all, so you don't even need to know where you are. You could be inside with no GPS, and then you can fly around all you want without GPS accuracy, broadcasting some random GPS location, and you're fine.
Does look like that.
Although I'm sure that's not what the FAA intends.
I agree.
That's exactly my
But
That's I can't imagine
is
that's
that
what the intent.
is that the ASTM or the FAA rule?
That's the
It's
ASTM.
that's
Well, then the
ASTM.
FAA approved it, so then the FAA is okay with that.
Right.
That's how I see that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
or they don't know. Yeah, well, yeah, but either way, it's definitely right in writing. But I wonder.
And it is
Yeah.
approved.
Yeah,
Right.
and I guess people will be designing around that spec too. So that would mean that it should be designed such that it wouldn't, block that PFST, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And there was some Meet initially talked about an SOC to work around an open source, and we can look to other black boxes like cellular modems, and that's exactly what a number of the broadcast module manufacturers are working on. And there are people working on modules that have logic plus GPS receivers plus Bluetooth transmitters, and that's the the big block diagram of what a broadcast module is. Pretty simple.
The other thing I would note is if this is the case, right? If we can read this as we read it, and then you don't need a location fix, that's why it doesn't matter the source of your GPS, because they don't actually care, right? All that matters is the remote ID signal is broadcast and it's not tampered with. It doesn't matter if the location is tampered with, because you're still broadcasting from the drone, I guess, is the idea, and you're still broadcasting that session or drone ID. I would assume. I guess that's got to be the idea we're moving forward with, right? I mean, it makes sense if you don't need to fix it. It doesn't matter where you get the GPS from.
I know they're so worried about where the pilot location is. I'm surprised they would let you fly at all if it's not broadcasting an accurate pilot location.
Right.
Yeah, because so what they want for the the accuracy is it's a design accuracy, not an operational accuracy.
Yeah.
And so they want you to be able to point to a phone for the ground control station that has a 15-foot accuracy. Once the manufacturer stipulates that, the FAA is good with it. There's no need for operational testing. The airborne testing is a test on the overall system, not on the pretty sure not on. Oh wait, it is on the accuracy of the aircraft GPS. So once you establish the aircraft accuracy and point to a GPS, you're good. And then you do not, the operator is not culpable or accountable to a failure in the accuracy of the device. The manufacturer is.
I mean, at the end of the day, like if you're trying to design a system that people are going to use, you can't just shut down everything everybody's going to do because you can't get a location fix, right? I mean, I guess that's actually really realistic. The surprise is that it's in this document, I guess, to me, right? That's what I would say.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I got to dig into the 7.4.2.
Basically, if you can show that your system meets the requirements, they'll approve it, and then when you go fly, if it can't get a good GPS signal, you can fly anyway. Which really makes it sound like it would be very easy to tamper with something because you can just interfere with the GPS signal and fly, and it will fly and broadcast bogus remote ID information about GPS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Meat said, it looks like we found a loophole. So this one is this one is worth digging into. We
Don't
definitely
tell anyone.
Yeah, keep it on the DL until the day before. Yeah.
Just block. Yeah, just block. Yeah, servo control.
Don't tell the FAA.
So over on YouTube, Legendary Sideburns is saying that the quad's already transmitting a radio signal. So what's the point of remote ID when you can already see where the quad is from where the remote or where the RF signal is coming from.
Because you need a lot of ground stations for that.
Also, you're not getting a session or like you have to have that secured session or drone ID.
I think
Not
he's
everything goes to
saying I
database.
can see the drone right there. Why do I need to know where it is? But there's a lot more to remote ID than just seeing where a drone is. It's about knowing ideally who's flying and why they're flying and where the operator is, except for if you're flying recreationally.
Right. As Tex just said, RF does not provide location. Yep.
No, but your eyes give you some idea of the location.
Because we all fly visual line of sight.
Yeah, and it's also like a question of who can see it, right? Like, so that I think the idea is supposed to be no matter where you are, behind trees or across the park, if you can get that signal, you can tell, hey, something's going on here, and there's drones in the area. Yeah, that's the idea of remote ID. I definitely understand the basic ideas of like, hey, you could see the drone, and I don't need to worry about why do I care, right? You're always going to be able to see it, but I would say the government doesn't care about like logic and reason a lot of times, or at least that's something I've learned, is that it's a lot about like by the books laws that you have to write down and make sure people that can be somewhat enforceable later. And that means you have to blanket a lot of stuff. You can't provide exceptions you want to provide, or they're very difficult to get. Like a lot of those pieces, right? And then as we've talked about before, it comes up to interpretation instead. Instead of getting all these carve outs, you just get essentially carve outs, which are like people not fucking with you when you do stuff, right?
And like Meat says in the chat, Congress said do this, so the FAA is doing this.
Exactly.
And part of their explanation in the past has been citizens are concerned that there's a drone flying around near their house. They want to know why is it there, who's flying it. They want to bring up their cell phone and be able to learn more about what's going on. And even though you can see the drone and you kind of know where it is, the point of remote ID is to give that extra information. And then, of course, Homeland Safety and others, Department of Defense, want to know, oh, somebody's flying this drone from the third floor of a high-rise building, and they're in this room, and we need to go stop them immediately. Therefore, the really strict vertical requirements on the operator. Text just asking, who is developing the cell phone apps? There is one for Android devices called Open Remote ID, or gosh, what was it?
Open Drone ID or
Open
something.
Drone ID, yeah.
Yeah. So this is another question: is like basically, are those apps like? Is there some kind of regulated app, like, or what is happening?
Anyone can make an app.
So like, if I'm a police officer though, right, and I need to like check the area, like, is there going to be an FAA app, or are they just going to use some random app and then get a session ID and have to write that somewhere? Like,
the FAA might do something like what they did with Aloft, and where they use that for their before you fly, and maybe it will be integrated into that. But I think it's just going to be up to the different companies to make their own remote ID app for their modules and standard.
So I like Meat's question here. Is there anything keeping private apps from doing data harvesting and history and the likes?
Nothing.
Nope. It's completely open, public information. If you stick an antenna on your roof and you can collect those signals, you will know where all the drones near you are flying, what patterns they're doing. Commercial interests are definitely worried about this because you could spy on your competitor and know where they're flying all their drones all the time, what kind of patterns they're doing, and learn all kinds of things about their business based on what their remote ID is telling you. And there's nothing stopping somebody from publicly publishing that to a website. People collaborating across the country and making a map of the United States and where every single drone is at the moment and the history of where they've ever been.
Yeah, the only benefit there, I'll say, is session ID, right? So the idea there is that we should be able to have a session ID so that we change our ID each time we fly. And that will mean that you can't be tracked across flights unless they see your physical drone or know where you fly. Like tracking multiple session IDs should not give you information about new session IDs. So in that respect, like you will get information about drones that are flying in the area, but you won't necessarily know like this same drone has been here every day for a week, right? That's the idea.
And Meat asks a good question. How is the session ID generated? I don't think that's established at this point.
Yeah, I just all I saw, and I'm new at this, like digging into the law stuff, but all that I saw was just carve out for like, hey, we got to do this. We're gonna write how to do this at some point.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as those apps and stuff goes, like there isn't even one single specific standard for how the remote ID information is transmitted. So technically, if 4 different companies get 4 different remote ID means of compliance approved by the FAA, you could have to have 4 different apps that, talk to each one in a different language to figure out where a drone is. Now, I doubt the FAA will do that. They'll probably say, oh, you have to do the same thing that this ASTM standard is doing. But
well,
there's nothing
does the
stopping
that's
ASTM
that.
also
standard-
not the point of. I don't know if they would limit if someone else made another means of compliance. I don't think they would stop it from going through because there's already one that kind of seems to defeat the rule.
And it's a little bit tricky because drone manufacturer A could say, okay, we're complying with the standard by using Bluetooth 5 long range. Great. My cell phone doesn't have Bluetooth 5 long range. I can't see it. But my cell phone does have Wi-Fi. And drone B is doing remote ID and they're broadcasting it over Wi-Fi. So I can see that drone, but I can't see the other one because they're using a different technology. And I think the ASTM standard says you can use Wi-Fi, you can use Bluetooth 4, you can use Bluetooth 5 long range, and it's up to the manufacturer then to decide which one they do. Or I think like in the case of ArduPilot, they were trying to support all of them so that you would get the widest range possible on devices.
What ASTM standard says is we're going to use Bluetooth 5 because that has the error checking that was also one of the requirements of the rule. Yes, it'll be an interesting year. May we live in interesting times. It didn't have to be this interesting with everything else going on in the world.
I think we should address what KBS Ken said and just point out. So he said somewhere a session ID needs to be tied to your quad and registration for law enforcement to track a pilot down. So that's supposed to be on like a FAA secured server, right? And then Meat says that's on an unsecured S3 bucket sitting somewhere probably. So FAA already has experience with running secured servers. Is that right? Like they already have a database of like pilots and all that stuff. And so far, I'm not aware of any data breaches on that stuff. But yeah. So hopefully they have some understanding of how to run that stuff and can give law enforcement and people who need it proper access without exposing, data.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It does make me worried when you have IT discussions with the rule makers, and there's appears to be a dearth of deep technology understanding in the FAA.
Yeah, I've definitely lived through some of that before, trying to explain technology to non-technology people who are trying to, regulate or control it. It usually doesn't go well.
I was looking at Meat's comment. Hopefully, I'm very jaded about data leaks in the modern age, though. Yeah, well, you're in good company. Yeah. 4 decades of IBM has made me pretty jaded as well.
When I think of people not understanding technology and trying to regulate it, it always goes back to the quote from the senator from Alaska talking about the internet is made of a series of tubes. I don't know if you remember that one, Dave. It goes back a while.
Ooh, IBM is basically a meme at this point.
Take a breath, Dave.
Still have some friends working there. Still 408,000 employees.
Lonely Fatality, I just want to clarify. So he says, I like how they made a big deal about sub 250 quads, but they make it and then make it that even part 107 sub 250 quads need remote ID. So it's just the basis of registration. So they're not setting a weight in the remote ID rules. It's just strictly based on what quads you have to register. And because you have to register sub 250 for 107, it applies to that. So it's sort of a technicality thing. It's
and it's something to be concerned about too, because remote ID says if you have to register your drone. Now, if the FAA next year changes the rules for registering your drone to be anything down to 10 grams, now you have to have remote ID on everything down to 10 grams.
Yep.
Or if we get really lucky and they go the other direction, then maybe you don't have to have remote ID on your 600-gram drone. And
stay positive.
XJet is asking over on YouTube, like, how do you put remote ID on a Mobula 6 being flown under Part 107 without crippling its performance? Yeah, you can't. You fly it
Pretty much.
indoors and you pretend you're flying it
in a
outside.
Freya.
I don't know. You fly in a Freya that doesn't exist because there are no CBOs yet.
Yeah, I mean, a thing we pointed out too. We talked about this when we had Dave on when me and Bardwell talked to him. But if you're flying as a 107 commercial pilot, like to film YouTube videos, like that means you can't fly outside with anything you can't put a module on. You know what I mean? Like you just can't review that whoop outdoors, or it's going to be a night. Like you're not reviewing the whoop anymore. It just it puts a lot of things in weird situations, right? It just doesn't make any sense, unfortunately. Like it's because it's blanket applied, right? It's because these has to be registered, and that covers remote ID. It's not like they said, hey, we want these tiny quads to have modules on them. It's just a blanket because of the way they made the rules. That's at least the way I see it. It's much easier for them to go, hey, we're just going to apply the registration to quads already, than say, here's a bunch of list of what applies, to this. That's what I would say.
And maybe they'll write an advisory circular that says we're not going to enforce rule XYZ in this specific case. But my guess is they won't explicitly say that. They just won't, enforce that on, Nick Burns. If he's flying a 50-gram drone around his backyard, the FAA is not going to fine him for doing that. Now, if somebody's doing something really reckless, then maybe they'll make an example out of them. So who knows what they'll do.
This is where I should just say the obligatory, although you're right, we don't want laws that we technically avoid instead of, like they could enforce on the books, but they don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really don't like that idea. And like XJet also points that out, rules like that are really bad if the rule exists, but people don't enforce them except for when they feel like it. Like that just opens up the ability for law enforcement to abuse that in any way they want. Like we normally just ignore this, but we don't like this person because of XYZ, so you're going to get a huge fine and everybody else gets off, and it's just terrible.
I was going to say, that's generally where the targeting comes in, right? That's generally where you see the way for them to find and target people they don't like or want to get rid of, right? So it's unfortunate.
Maybe people who went to protest or something like that.
Yeah, say you went to an FAA protest a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
On February 27th.
2020.
Oh boy.
All right. Well, I think we may. Yeah. So I think there's some good points, and one of the points in here has reiterated a point that we've been on for 3 years, which is if the rules are unreasonable, that will result in widespread noncompliance. And we are down in the details, and we're I think reasonably expert on this one. And I think there's going to be it's going to be straightforward for a standard remote ID. So I bought my old Mavic, I buy my new Mavic, it's in, I turn it on, it works, I don't care. I think for a broadcast module, it might be a little different for us. We'll have to connect it, but power it up, and it's happy. Its lights blink, and off I go. And hopefully, it's about that difficult. We'll see. I expect enforcement will continue how it's been. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see, what else has been going on here? So Dave, do we have any word from the FAA on when CBOs are going to be announced?
No, sir. We do not.
Any day now, right?
That's right. Yeah, we could say, well, we heard it was September, but we're not sure what year. No, it's supposed to be September 2022, which is
that's
now.
Freya's, not CBOs.
You can submit
CBOs
an
are
application
a while ago
to create a FRIA as of September according to the remote ID rule, but nobody knows how to do that because they haven't announced how you can do that.
Right.
Other than that you have to be a CBO or an education. So technically, if you're, say, a high school, any day now or college, you could send the FAA an application for a FRIA, but they just don't tell you how to do that.
Take a wild guess.
Probably
it?
sort of like submitting a waiver. You send it in, and 90 days later they tell you we reject it, and then you have to try it again, and hopefully you do better the second time.
No news on that. That's certainly something that whenever we have an opportunity to speak with anyone at the FAA, whether it's the outreach organization, the UAS um, integration office, we bring this up, both on the topic of CVOs and FRIAs, because that's key to allowing people to fly without remote ID.
Let's see, what other questions do people have here? Ken's asking, on a different subject, I fly largely in areas where if a crewed aircraft would fly, they would be in dire circumstances. I think that's true for a lot of us. I think this has been being called now shielded operations. Is there anything you can share about shielded operations, what it might look like, additional certifications, and so on? Dave, you can probably help answer that.
So yeah, um, we are able to get shielded operations included in the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC recommendations. So that's obviously pre-notice for public rulemaking, pre-rule for Beyond Visual Line of Sight. However, a lot of discussion on shielded operations, and so it became a norm and a well understood and good central operation that was viewed as helping situational awareness. So lots of discussion with the key stakeholders that were really concerned about it, notably the helicopter folks. And there was some concern about the agricultural spraying folks. That said, what we put forward in the BV loss arc was that we would fly up to 100 feet over a structure and 100 feet out, and that was viewed as a good way to manage shielded ops. XJet will tell you that in New Zealand they have a shielded ops that you don't fly under the top of the obstruction, and you have 400 feet lateral, and so that's not what was put forward with the FAA in the BV loss arc. In addition, we know there is an Assure project with 5 schools going on to validate um, how this might be utilized, and so that's work that we anticipate that is happening now.
XJet did clarify it's a 100-meter radius and below the height of the tallest structure. So
100
330 feet or
meters?
so. Well, I mean,
In New
it would make sense in
Right.
other countries that they would use meters and not
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah. Okay.
Meters are much
39.37.
nicer.
Says the engineer.
That's
Yep.
right. So much easier to deal in MKS than SAE. All right.
Let's see. What else have we been up to, Dave? The FPV Freedom Coalition. Has there been anything interesting on the AC or the tasking groups for the AC?
Well, it's not interesting, but we are busy. It's we're wrapping up a tasking group 13, which was written about a framework that the FAA put out. The tasking group has been consumed about 6 months on this. It will be reported out on the next AC meeting, which is October 20. Location, I don't think has been identified, Alex. Is that right?
I haven't heard a location yet.
Yep, that's my understanding as well. And so that paper is being finished up and spending time on that, submitting it to the FAA, and then that will go public in an ebook on October 20. Not one I would rush out. That at least that specific paper. I mean, it's thoughtful. A lot of good ideas in it. It's deep. Not terribly relevant to a lot of what we're working on.
And do we know when the next
And
AC meeting is going to be? Let's see, we had one back in
October-
June, so the next one's
Oc-
October.
October 20.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
10/20.
when I'm in, that's when I'm in Florida.
Oh,
So a month, almost 2
Racing?
months from now. Oh,
okay.
Alex is busy multitasking, which is
Oh, yeah.
good.
I'm trying to find something in my textbook here.
Okay. From around the room, Blunty, Alex, Dan, anything else from you guys?
Nope.
All right.
Nope, I've got nothing
Okay,
else.
good.
I just want to thank Blunty for being here and joining the FPV Freedom Coalition. It looks like you brought some fans with you, which is great. We got more participation in this meeting than usual, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, I'll try to bring people every Wednesday. Hopefully, I'll tell them on the news before when we do this roundtable thing.
Yeah, that's
So,
pretty
for
good timing that you guys have the news just the evening before, so you can get the word out for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
And
appreciate it.
we really hope Josh has a working air conditioner very, very soon, and he'll be able to join us for our next meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Very good. And also my welcome, Blunty. I'm thrilled that you're on board, and we could use the help, and we appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
All right. Alex, anything from you?
And anybody else in the chat's got any other questions we can try to answer before we go?
Thank you, Dan.
The
Appreciate
main thing I'll say, and I think I said before, is just you'll just have to shut me up because I'll just talk a lot. So
not a problem.
I'll just go on a tangent for 3 hours.
You'll
so.
fit right in with Dave and Josh.
Okay.
I've learned to try to cut them off if I've got something to say once in a while.
Fair, absolutely fair. All right. With that, if nothing else, then I'll close out the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion.
See you guys
Appreciate
later.
it.
Thank you.
Thanks.